Hi and welcome back. In today's show, I'm going to take you behind one of the main headlines I've got here on my channel. And that is that I raised £895,775 in one proposal for a charity partnership based here in Hackney. And what I'm going to do is to share some of the key principles and the key frameworks that I created that led to that result. So over the last 7 videos, I have introduced some of the ideas as a way to reboot my channel, but also focus down on this idea of boomer women who are looking to become industries of one. And I really planted the seeds around how that can come about through this major win in one proposal, which had been built up in the years prior to that, but this was a way where I could really test those ideas and see how they were formulated in real time, in real life. So over the last 7 videos, I've talked about the ideas of using Jungian individuation, having backstory as leverage, industries of one, and that's a key aspect to all of this, as well as astrology. And so one of my skills is that I really know how to lean into synthesizing what could appear to be very different, very eclectic ideas, modalities, and conflate them to create one thing, a new thing that didn't exist beforehand. And so this sense of how could you, as a boomer woman who's looking to put together her own industry of one, so that you can join us as industries of one, I'm going to take you behind the scenes. And so I want to set a bit of context in terms of how and why I raised this money for this charity partnership. And I need to step you back in terms of David Cameron's Britain. Yes, we remember those years when he was the Tory leader. And one of the things that he did was he introduced this idea of big society. It was a big government policy shift, meaning that it was going from a centralized approach in terms of delivery of services to a decentralized one. And under big society, it was about transferring the power to local councils, charities, voluntary organizations, and individuals. And running alongside that, funders were no longer just looking to fund good causes, because there's good causes everywhere. It was also a shift towards how could organizations come together and work as strategic partners to bring about a greater result that then helps organizations move beyond their normal, 4 walls in terms of how they operate into something bigger. So that's the context in which I was operating in, and I was brought in specifically to work with this emerging partnership. So there were 4 key organizations. These were the ones who had their boots on the ground and had their ears to the ground, and they knew their clients and beneficiaries very well. They were known in the area, and they were nimble, very effective organizations, but invariably were under-resourced. So their biggest problem was always receiving piecemeal funding. It could last a year, 18 months, 2 years, but never enough that could really help them springboard into something bigger. So that's the context. And so meeting them, you have leaders of 4 organizations, plus there was an organization that managed the partnership, and then you had the local council. But I'm going to focus on the 4 organizations because they were really the ones who drove the change and the transformation. And when you, as a boomer woman who's looking to transform yourself, you want to be able to identify some of the levers that can actually take you there. And so I'd never raised that amount of money before. My largest amount at that point was like £500,000, which was raised quite a few years prior to that. But there were seeds that were being planted. And so my approach was, let me look inside my own invisible portfolio that is packed with an eclectic range of skills, knowledge, talents, wisdom, etc., that's got nuance and depth to them. And how can I apply some of those to this new scenario? And it was a new scenario because there were 25 partnerships that were forming right across the UK. That the funder was looking for. And obviously there was competition with thousands, tens of thousands of other organizations. So the first aspect and the first principle that I pulled on and created as a framework was to look at this emerging partnership through the lens of Jungian individuation. It's a key concept within Jungian individuation. I did a master's in Jungian analytic theory. So I have some real tangible experience of how this works. And invariably, it's the journey towards us as individuals becoming whole. And all I did, not quite all I did, but I extrapolated and played around with that concept to map it against the four key organizations. Because what we're doing here is looking at these organizations and the leaders of those organizations and how those leaders could come together to form their industries, but take them through the journey of individuation. And one of the things that these leaders of these really small organizations constantly faced was that they had adopted and lived into the roles that society had already given to them. And they were organizations that were really great at the sort of operational problem solving for their communities, who invariably always have very high demands and a range of needs and demands. And these organizations were steeped in the culture of those communities. They were the operational problem solvers, and they were always punching above their weight, but tended to be under-resourced. So they could never raise their head properly and significantly beyond the parapet of what had already been designed. Here are organizations, they're under-resourced, they're facing and dealing with minority communities. And there was always this drip feed, but yet they produced great results. So that's the context in which they were operating in. So there, from a Jungian point of view, was, as individuals, how often do we live into roles that other people have assigned to us? And the idea of individuation is to step beyond and become an outsider of those projected roles and to grow into your own sense of wholeness. So that's what I did. I played around with that concept and I could find the connecting points that could make sense to the emerging situation that was in front of me. And as I said, you have funders who were looking for elements of creativity, something different, something distinctive that could move them beyond this piecemeal funding. And so that was one of the elements, that was one of the layers that I applied, because you have individuals, they're coming together as a collective and they're breaking beyond their stereotypical roles to move beyond being operational problem solvers to being visible strategic leaders. And so that was one aspect. The other aspect was around industries of one. So these four key organizations that represented, they were representing families, children and families, and looking to improve the educational achievement of primary school children and to upskill their parents so they can better support them through the education system that was not designed for the cultures that they had come from. So there was lots of complexity and moving parts. And the four key organizations were a blend of, so you had an organization that represented the Turkish communities, and then you had one that represented African communities, and then Caribbean communities, and then communities, British-based communities in that they were the second, third, fourth generation minorities and their lived experiences through the British education system. As you can see, there's lots of complexities here. So each of the organisations, in their own right, were an industry, because they were really nuanced, really nimble, and very much understood. And so here again, it was weaving together, well, how could these groups come together? And one of my applications was about, is there a way to conflate? Is there a way to bridge their strengths and their weaknesses and collapse them into something new? Well, then, yes. They then moved from individual industry of one to become industries of one that was representing this group. And so linking it back to you as a boomer woman who is looking to evolve and expand, recognizing that you're not in a position to retire if you were asked to do that in 2027, and you're looking to repackage your skill set. So that was a way into seeing industries of one being built in real time, but coming under the umbrella of a partnership. So again, using my creativity and my intelligence and my creativity and blending. I'm a great synthesizer. And it's like, how could I apply it to this scenario? So that's the industries of one. Then the key, one of the key principles and practices and frameworks that I use is around backstory. Backstory as leverage. In one of the previous videos, over the last 7 videos, I spoke quite a bit about backstories and the power of backstories. And backstories can be used as a way that they hold us back. So we're very fearful and we're timid and they trap us into what was. Whereas what I did was I flipped the backstory, that concept of backstory, and just looked at backstory as leverage. And one of the things, whether we are individuals or whether we are part of a team or organizations, whatever the entity, we are steeped in trillions and trillions and trillions of pieces of data, personally and organizationally. And it doesn't really matter the sector. Organizations tend not to, as well as us as individuals actually, tend not to examine our trillions of pieces of data and being able to select data that could actually match and map a scenario that then flips this idea of backstories being fearful and retentive through to backstories as leverage. And that's exactly what I did. And it's about, backstories can show up in the form of client results. It can show up in the form of outcomes. It can show up in terms of, the branding. What are you becoming? What are you moving away from? What are you moving towards? Backstories can show up in so many different ways, and it's for us to be able to examine which piece of data can fit this scenario. And the scenario, as I said, was this four-pillared organizations that were coming together to create this transformative educational empowerment program. And it's about synthesizing and knitting those backstories together in a way whereby, as individual organizations, but also as a partnership, they could become powerful, potent, and visible. Because one of the things they suffered with was visibility beyond the small confines of their area. And the idea that this program and this funding opportunity gave them was to have national prominence. And baked within backstories, whether you're coming to it from a personal point of view or organizational point of view, by understanding your backstories, they really help you to identify who is the hero of the story. And so storytelling was very much central to how I put this whole proposal together. But who's the hero? Because the hero is going to face a challenge. There's an obstacle that the hero has to overcome in order to bring about a resolution. And we see this played out in every type of story. There are a myriad of stories, but it's essentially the same framework. Now, there are many ways to identify who is the hero of the story. Many ways. And so by understanding your data, it will can give some indication as to who is the hero of the story. Now, for this collection of organizations, the hero of the story was real lived experiences. That was the hero of the story, because we have real parents, real children, a real situation that they were facing, and it was first-hand experiences. So that was the most appropriate hero for this story, which I was able to weave in. So understanding the power of your backstories really does offer you a springboard into what is it that you are seeking. So along with backstories, then the power of astrology, which is another area of expertise that I am steeped in, that added on top of BizDev and understanding individuals as well as Jungian. There's just a whole myriad of skills that are in my invisible portfolio, and I'm just sharing a handful of them that help towards bring about this result. But astrology is a very powerful mechanism and process. And at the time, when we were going through all of this during David Cameron's Tory era, and I've mentioned previously in my run of 7 videos, is the planet Saturn. And the planet Saturn, as a transit at that time, was in the sign of Libra. So I mentioned Saturn because Saturn is about leadership. Saturn is about responsibility. Saturn is about authority. Saturn is about limitations to a certain extent, but also the lessons we can learn through hard graft. And we've arrived at a point whereby we are acclaiming ourselves as well as, wanting that from the outside world. So that's one context for Saturn. The other context for Saturn, which I've mentioned previously, is about the Saturn return. So let's deal with Saturn as a transit at that time was moving through the sign of Libra, and Saturn is exalted, meaning it's in its most powerful position in the sign of Libra. And what Libra represents is balance, harmony, equity, and justice. So I was able to map those principles and what Saturn stands for very effectively through, because it was reflecting, this whole proposal was about equity and justice and educational empowerment and fairness. So it mapped in quite a powerful way. And Libra is ruled by Venus, and Venus rules Libra as well as Taurus. And at the time, Venus was moving through Sagittarius. And Sagittarius is about freedom, it's about ideals. It's also this sense of wisdom gained from other cultures, other ideas, other philosophies. Again, really perfect, because the composition of the partnership was made up of communities, Turkish communities, African communities, Caribbean communities, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th generation British communities and experiences. And it was the conflation of all of that and the confluence of all of that where I was able to connect those dots. That was very reflective of the signature of Sagittarius. And the whole framework, of the actual proposal was about what is a philosophy that we could develop that is original, is our own, but really does take account of the different cultures that existed within this partnership. And so that's how Saturn and Venus, how I was able to think about and incorporate the philosophies behind those. And then the second application of Saturn at that time was the principle of the second Saturn return. So the first Saturn return brings you to the ages of 28 to 30-ish. Second Saturn return is from years 30 to 60. So all of the leaders of these 4 organizations that then formed the hub of the partnership were going through the era, the 30-year period of what leads to the second Saturn return, because they were aged anywhere between 30 and 60. And the period of what leads to the second Saturn return is that you're moving away from, these are the principles and the ways of being that I learned from my family, for example, or my culture. But it's more about, what am I building? Are we building something that's authentic? And these organizations were leaning into what made them authentic. That's why you as a boomer woman really needs to be thinking about, what is that fingerprint? I think it was Steve Jobs who said, put your ding in the world. And that was them putting their ding in the world, because they were able to look through a historical, cultural lens, as well as ethnicity, in terms of this theme of education, and looking historically how education was treated within their cultural context, and then looking at, where are the areas of connection in the British education system, together with what could they take from their historical and cultural lens and apply it. So that is the reason why understanding what makes you authentic is a really powerful attribute that you can apply, you can leverage. And so they are some of the key principles. There are others, but these were some of the key principles and some of the key frameworks that I was able to create and curate and to synthesize in a way that I could help and guide this set of organizations to really be seen as leaders in their own right, as leverage. And what did they want to gain? They wanted to gain reputation, a wider reputation beyond Hackney, beyond London, and, across the UK, coming back to, when we are making decisions, what is it? What is it that we're looking for? Are we looking to gain something, save something, do something, be something? And they certainly wanted leverage around reputation. They certainly wanted leverage that would increase their income, which it certainly did. And they wanted leverage to be seen as innovators. And so my concept and my practice of this idea of industries of one, but having methodologies. And, as I said at the beginning of today's show, this was tested. This isn't just theory. It sounds like a good idea. This was tested with a real problem, a series of problems, complex problems, a series of different stakeholders, real life people, real families, real parents, real young people, real communities, tested against building something that was innovative. And so it's through this blended methodology that does have other components to it that I was able to secure. I wrote a very persuasive, I think it was about a 65-page business document that was, that really swung it for them. And I think one of the things that really was certainly a pillar was this sense of authenticity. And I'm a real kind of advocate for that, being uncopyable, really does have power and strength. If we think about the phenomenal Lin-Manuel Miranda of many fames, but certainly Hamilton, it was his own unique blend. And I wrote an article about this on LinkedIn, maybe last year or something like that. But it was looking at this sense of being uncopyable. And in order to be that and do that and live that, it's like it's buried within you. And that's what I have the skill and expertise of helping people see what that is, identify what that is, and then sculpting something that is very unique. And that's what I was able to achieve here, is one example that is a really packed, steeped, nuanced case study in real life. And so this video, this show, completes the 8 previous videos that I've put out over the last week or so. It's not the end of the Smart Years channel. Far from it. It's just completing this cycle of series, this 8-part series, where I have indicated, here are aspects of my methodology that brings about really substantive results. I've given you a sense of what happens on a partnership level, which actually brings out the complexity, and then pulling the different aspects apart. Obviously, it can relate to an individual and how they can scope that out. So that, as I said, this video brings the 8-part series to a close. So I'll continue posting here on my channel, because the 8-part series was a way for me to reboot my channel. The focus is still going to be on boomer women and exploring, reinvention, evolution, developing industries of one. Who are we? Who do we need to become? And looking at it from the what and the why perspective, as opposed to a how perspective. It's not just going to be a library of how-to videos. I take a far more expansive view, because our worlds are nuanced. And the how-tos and the direct applications to individual scenarios, well, that's what you pay for in terms of my strategic and practical services. So that's what I wanted to wrap up with this 8-part series. You, as a boomer woman, you're sitting on your own mountain. That's packed with data that can help you pull together this industry of one. And if you want to begin exploring where you could start any of that, then I do have a free resource. It's a free audio guide that steps you through identifying what possibly could be 3 gold mines that live inside your life story. And then when you want to go further, when you want to go deeper, when you want to get into the weeds and the nuances of, how could you apply the frameworks that I have, built upon, then please book in with a session or sessions with me. So I'll leave it there, and I would love to know, what are some of your first-hand experiences that you could begin noodling on? As I say, backstories are packed with data, backstories and points of view, and who was the hero, give you a lens into it. But I'd love to hear what your comments are in terms of, are you a boomer woman who is facing the problem of, you've got decades of experience, which you have, because as boomer women, as a demographic, we're aged anywhere from 62, that's the lowest end, because that was 1964, I'm a 63 boomer, through to 80. The oldest boomer is going to be touching 80. So we've got an 18-year window in terms of the ages. But who are you becoming? Who are you evolving into? And what does the next stage of your third act look like? I'd love to hear. Put your comments in the comment box below. Thank you so much for being part of my 8 video series that wraps this up, but I will continue to bring you more content. So look out for the next one, which is coming very soon. Stay well, and I'll see you again on the next show. Bye.